on our website, and you'll be able to see them afterwards. And then lastly, all attendee information will be shared. So anyone who registered for the event, we're going to share names and email addresses so folks can know as folks are collaborating and in conversation about the work. So those are just a little housekeeping. How we'll spend the time is we're going to do a community wealth building overview. I want to be clear that this is not a presentation about the entire initiative, community wealth building initiative, nor the work that we've done over the last 2 years. We're going to find another time to share more about that, and we'll be updating our website over the next couple of weeks with some of that information. But the objective of this hour is really to talk specifically about the RFP and to answer your questions related to the RFP. So that's how we'll prioritize the time, but we will kind of do some level setting to ground you in the work that we're doing around community wealth building. So we'll start with that, then we'll go over the RFP. If you've read the RFP, there's not going to be anything new here. We're just going to kind of speak the things that are in the RFP and give a little bit more color to it, just so you understand how we're thinking about the work. And then, so we'll talk about the different ecosystem elements, eligibility and requirements, selection criteria, and then we'll walk you through how you apply. So for many of you this might be the first time that you're applying for a grant from the city, to introduce you to your e-procurement system and give you some resources so that you're up to speed on what that looks like. And then lastly, we'll hope to spend about 25 to 30 minutes at the end of this to answer your questions. So start to populate. If you have questions now, feel free. I see a few coming in, populate that there. So I want to start with just a quick overview and just to ground us in definitions around community wealth building. I think the term is used often, and I want to make sure that we're all on the same page about what the city of Chicago means when we say community wealth building and what this RFP is about. So I think oftentimes when folks talk about wealth and wealth building, they're talking about the left-hand side, about individual and household wealth, which I think, as many of you know, really refers to the personal wealth of an individual or household. It's often described as what you own minus what you owe. And there's a lot of different things that go into that formula of determining what your individual or your household's wealth is. Community wealth, you can see on the right-hand side, is really referring to the shared wealth of a community, a connected group of people. And I like to emphasize that it is about shared wealth amongst multiple households, not the sum of wealth of those households. So it's really about what are the assets that they're holding in common. And so the city, in collaboration with multiple local and national community members, have really come together to come up with our own definition of community wealth building. So in collaboration with our working groups and advisory councils, come up with this definition that is our official definition of community wealth building. So for us at the city, community wealth building is an approach to economic development that promotes the local, democratic, and shared ownership and control of community assets. That this work is exclusively focused on assets, and we'll talk more about specifically what assets we're prioritizing. But it is, you can see they're bolded, about local, democratic, and shared ownership and control. So what do we mean when we say those three words, local, democratic, and shared? I think we chose those words really intentionally, and they mean something to us. So when we talk about ownership and control of community assets being local, we mean that it's in the hands of the residents in the neighborhood in which the development is being built, not in the hands of residents that live in another Chicago neighborhood or another city entirely. When we say that we want that ownership and control to be democratic, that these models are looking and developing governance structures that acknowledge power dynamics and facilitate equitable decision-making power. In traditional models of ownership, there's often hierarchy and exclusion. Some people get to decide what happens. Other people are impacted by those decisions. But within community wealth building, we're looking at these models being democratic and democratically making decisions and having democratically shared power. And then last is shared, so that ownership and control is shared in the hands of as many people as possible, that it is broad-based and not concentrated in the hands of just one person or a privileged few people, even if those people come from historically oppressed and marginalized communities. We're really looking at how do we just think about sharing the wealth as much as possible. And so that's kind of the crux of this. I think you'll see throughout this presentation, a lot of what this work is trying to do is really to think about how do we shift our relationships to each other and to our communities and the assets in our communities. That oftentimes when you look at traditional business models, there's a boss and the employees, there's a landlord and there are tenants. But in these models that you'll see, all of the employees are the co-owners, all of the tenants are the landlords, and there isn't this binary around who owns and who doesn't, who controls and who doesn't, but really anyone who's participating is benefiting from the ownership and control. And so for us, community wealth building is also focused on models that are majority owned and majority controlled. I won't go too deep into this, but basically want to just emphasize that we're really looking at models where residents have majority ownership or control. And some of the models, it is 100%, right? So how are we moving as far up into that top right quadrant as possible, where 100% of it is owned and controlled by residents, but at the very minimum, we're hoping to support models that are at minimum 51% or more owned and controlled by residents. And so for us with the city, we're within our broader community wealth building initiative. We know that there's a lot of models that could fit into this. There's a lot of work that could fit into this, but we're going to start here in these 4 areas. So we're looking at what community wealth building can look like within business ownership, home ownership, land stewardship, and commercial property. And within each of those 4 pillars, we've selected a priority model that we at the city want to invest in. Within business ownership, it's worker cooperatives. Within home ownership, limited equity housing cooperatives. Within land stewardship, community land trusts. And within commercial property, community investment vehicles. And so I'm not going to spend time defining what those models are. We'll share these slides afterwards, and at future meetings that the city puts on, we'll go much deeper into this work. But just to state that these 4 are really our priorities as we think about building out the ecosystem of supports and investing in these models. I also want to state that for us, this work, we believe that community wealth building has a lot of impact and outcomes that are not just economic based. I think oftentimes folks jump immediately to the ways in which these models and this work will build and grow individual and household wealth and community wealth. But also that we know that this work is also a source of community power, self-determination, and much, much more. And so I just like to state that, especially given my role sitting in between 2 teams, our economic development team and our Office of Equity and Racial Justice, it's just critical to state that we see this initiative really sitting at the intersection of those 2 and having a lot of benefits to communities and individuals. And so kind of now to transition into what you all are here for, is our investment. And so in 2020, November 2020, Mayor Lightfoot committed $15 million from the Chicago Recovery Plan to support community wealth building. And so $15 million is the total investment that's specifically related to this project. I will say that the city outside of this initiative is supporting these models in other areas of our work. But we are also, designing this intentional program based on feedback that we've gotten from folks in community. And so that $15 million represents this initiative. So within this, we want to do 3 things. We have 3 goals. We want to strengthen the ecosystem, build the pipeline, and then invest in some large scale pilot projects. And I should state for those of you who don't know what the Chicago Recovery Plan is, it is an initiative that is funded by 2 sources. The first source comes from the federal government, from the American Rescue Plan Act, and the second source comes from a bond that the city has issued. And so this $15 million specifically comes from the federal funding. And so as we get into the RFP, you'll see that there's a number of requirements that we have. Some of those come from the city and our own interests and goals. Others come from the federal government. So now to get into the RFP RFP that was released. So about last Monday, I believe on November 19th, we released the first of a series of RFPs. And so if you think about our 3 goals, strengthen the ecosystem, build the pipeline of projects, and then third, to invest in some large scale pilot projects. This is the first phase, right? Of how do we invest in the ecosystem? So I want to clarify, because I saw a couple questions come in already, that $15 million represents the full program. And as we release a series of RFPs, we'll kind of chip away at that $15 million. So this will be $2 million of that broader 15. So this is our first initiative, the Community Wealth Ecosystem Building Program, or the Community Web. The goal at a very high level is to invest in the organizations that start, sustain, and scale community wealth building models. So I think one thing that we heard loud and clear from community is that as the city steps more intentionally into this space, one thing that's critically important is for us to recognize and fund and invest in those organizations that are starting and sustaining these models, that we shouldn't just go in and invest in a pilot project or a specific model per se, but that there's a whole ecosystem of folks who are doing, as you can see, the various services that are needed to actually get these models off the ground and to sustain them. So that's why we decided to invest in this first. So the Community Web program will fund an interconnected network of advisors to provide high quality, specialized, and culturally relevant technical assistance services at no cost to eligible nonprofit and for-profit startup and operating businesses leading community wealth building models. And we, through some research and conversations with folks locally, have landed on these 6 different categories as categories that we're going to fund. So the first is education and outreach. The second, business development. Third is legal and governance. The fourth, financing and fundraising. Fifth, assets and operations. And the sixth, research and convening. And so anyone who's applying to this first RFP should be an entity that does essentially provides technical assistance and education in one of those 6 categories. And so I'll go into a little bit more detail, kind of specifically what we're looking for within each of those 6. So this is kind of a bit of a rough visual of what we're trying to create with this community web, or this network of TA providers within community wealth building. We want to invest in organizations in each of those 5 areas, as you can see around the circle. And then we also want to seed funding for an organization or an entity to do research and convening that can kind of connect the dots across all of them. So you'll see as we get into this that the city is interested in and prepared to fund multiple organizations or multiple applicants in each area, although we're hoping that and intend to invest in just one organization to kind of be that convener in the middle, to do that research and convening and connect to everyone else in the ecosystem. So that is in an effort to make things coordinated and connected, and for that entity to really be in service to all of the other organizations in the ecosystem. We anticipate that there will be organizations, for example, that do legal and governance that only operate in one model, that they specifically do legal and governance for worker cooperatives and worker cooperatives only. And we also anticipate that there will be entities that apply that do legal and governance across all 4 models, the worker co-ops, limited equity housing co-ops, CIVs, and community land trusts. And so we're open to really, and we'll talk more about this, investing in whatever your organization specializes in. And so don't feel a need to just check all of the boxes, but really, hone in on what you're good at, where your expertise is, and design a program around that. So just general program guidance, that first piece is kind of what I just touched on, is that, we are really looking for program specialists, not program generalists. And so those applications that showcase that they're a specialist in what they do, the services that they offer, and the models that they're offering those services to will be prioritized over programs that kind of offer just pretty generalist supports. So know that as you're putting your application together. That an organization can apply multiple times. So you can submit more than one application, but know that each application is for just one ecosystem area. So I'm going to go back to this to just explain that a little bit more. If you're an organization that feels like you do business development really well, and you also do financing and fundraising really well, you need to submit 2 different applications for that, and that will be 2 separate programs. So if you want to do business development across multiple pillars or multiple models, that's fine. That's one application. But anytime you're kind of wanting to jump around and do basically offer more than one service, that will require you to submit a new application, answer those questions in light of that new ecosystem element, prepare a budget in light of that new ecosystem element, et cetera. So you're able to do more than one, but recognize that should be 2 separate applications. And then across each of them, across each of the different programs, there's a variety of things that you can do. And so think about that as you're putting together your application and your budget, that this funding can support, if you really want to ground this in just one-on-one coaching and consultation, that is possible. And we'll ask for you to include the number of hours and your hourly rates that you'll work. If you want to have a program that's doing group workshops, a startup or incubator or accelerator program for a cohort of individuals or a cohort of organizations, that's fine. Train the trainer programs, also encouraged. If you want to do these large scale convenings or summits, also, and then, thinking about some just development of materials, right? Development of templates, flyers, webinars, et cetera, also applicable. So we expect you will be a delegate agency of the city if you're selected, and that will require you to basically manage the program in full. The city will fund you, and you've designed the program, you will be responsible for implementing that program in full, and you will also be responsible for evaluating that program in full. So you can see here a list of things that are tasks are likely to include, but not limited to: program design and content. If you have vendors that you need to loop in, managing those vendors on your own, conducting marketing and outreach in alignment with the city's expectations. And then I think importantly, activities and outcomes reporting and evaluation. And we'll talk more about that later. But again, this is funding from the federal government. The city of Chicago will need to report out on the work that you do. And so we will work in partnership with you to make sure that you are evaluating and reporting and documenting what we need you to document in the right way, but know that can be a significant portion of work. And we encourage you to include that in the budget, whether that's dedicated staff or what, to make sure that you have what you need to be compliant with the evaluation and reporting. And then lastly, just from a programming standpoint, we're really excited about the fact that we're going to have this community web, this ecosystem of different TA providers. And we really want to think about how do we continue to share learnings across the ecosystem and find ways for us to be connected and coordinated. And so part of that will look like a required monthly meeting that will include times for folks to share out on what's happening in the ecosystem, what they've executed on, but also will be some knowledge and skill set development. The city, will work with others to potentially bring in some local, national, international stakeholders in the space to hone our own skill set and knowledge, and also that of our grantees. So I will just do an overview of these 6 different categories. Everything that's in here is in the RFP and in much more detail in the RFP, but I wanted to just give a preview to describe each of those 6 areas. So you can see there on the left, the 6, and then a description of what we're expecting, and then some examples. Those are simply examples. It's not required. There's other things not listed there that are perfectly acceptable, but just to kind of give you an idea of what we're looking for. So within education and outreach, we're looking for organizations who engage community members and orgs around just a collective study and reflection and discussion around community wealth building models. This could look like hosting various workshops and convenings. It could also look like hosting one-on-one workshops around these various models, but member outreach as well. It could look like a lot of things, but education and outreach is that first bucket. The second is business development. And I will say this one is maybe the most broad reaching, and that a lot of things can fall in this bucket of what is business development. And so for those who maybe feel like you do business development as well as others, and you only want to submit one application, it might make a lot of sense for you to put it in business development. So business development, we're looking for organizations who can offer both business and workforce development to organizations at any stage, from, startup, pre-launch phase, all the way to like mature, community wealth building businesses in Chicago. And that can look like offering strategic planning support, helping to develop business plan, thinking through succession planning, including co-op conversions, et cetera, doing member skills training, et cetera. There's a lot more listed in the RFP, but essentially it's that general business and workforce development. The third is legal and governance. So those entities who can provide legal education and consultation, specifically around governance structures primarily, thinking through helping organizations think through and file the paperwork to incorporate, to draft bylaws, supporting with democratic decision-making, et cetera. The fourth is financing fundraising. So we're looking for organizations who can provide support, counseling, and coaching to organizations and support them in getting the financing that they need. And that financing, it could look like grants, debt, and equity capital, really like supporting them across, connecting them to funders, et cetera. But you can see there are different examples, supporting them in development of a pro forma, preparing loans, helping them navigate city grant opportunities, et cetera. The fifth is around assets and operations. So we're looking at organizations who can help businesses and nonprofits as they move into purchasing, developing, managing, and potentially selling assets, property, land, so different forms of real estate. And so some of what that work could look like is doing some of that research and mapping to help organizations find potential properties, helping them to kind of cultivate or curate their team of professionals to support with the operations. So, your building or property managers, et cetera. But essentially, we're looking for organizations here who are, really good at supporting these organizations who are looking to acquire and control assets. And the last is research and convening. I want to flag that in the RFP, it says research and advocacy, and we're shifting it to be research and convening, which is a federal funding switch that we need to make just to stay in compliance. So it will be a sole entity that can conduct research across all of the community wealth building model businesses in the ecosystem. And so obviously this will be folks who are doing research locally on our local Chicago ecosystem, and then also, doing that original research and publishing reports to be in service to those in the broader field here. But then also our expectation is that this organization, being the sole entity that is kind of the connecting dots, will hold the responsibility of conducting convening for community members, hosting roundtables, et cetera. Okay, so eligibility. So I'll walk through both who do you need to be as an organization to be eligible, what about the program itself in terms of the geography, and then for the expenses as you think through the budget, what are eligible expenses. So as far as the applicant, you can be a nonprofit or a for-profit. You can be a collective that gets a fiscal sponsor. Obviously, cooperatives are eligible to apply, as well as other corporations. We would and will accept joint proposals and coalitions, but I kind of put that in quotation marks because there will be an expectation or a requirement that there is a lead applicant, and everyone else will need to be listed as a subcontractor. And so the city will just kind of get into one contractual relationship with one entity, even if you are applying as a coalition of entities applying together. So you'll have a lead applicant, everyone else will be a subcontractor. Local and national organizations are eligible to apply. And that includes And those organizations can apply on their own. They can also partner with each other. I will say one thing that's important for us with this RFP is that we're really trying to grow our local ecosystem, grow our own local capacity here in Chicago. And we recognize that we have a lot of gaps, right? So the point of this RFP is to both fund and invest in those entities who have been doing this work for a long time that have been underfunded and under-resourced, and to identify where there are gaps in our ecosystem and to bring in folks to help us fill those gaps. And so just to kind of state for those who are like national organizations, I think, the city will really prioritize those that have a presence here locally or who showcase a willingness to grow the local capacity and not just keep that knowledge and information and skill set at a national level. As far as program geography, we're really looking at those areas that have been disproportionately impacted by the pandemic. I should state that this funding comes as a response to the COVID-19 pandemic, and we see community wealth building as a solution or as a response to address a lot of the pre-existing economic disparities that were in place pre-pandemic that were then exacerbated by the pandemic. And so we're looking at organizations who are actually, it's a requirement to do this work in areas that have been disproportionately impacted by the pandemic, primarily in and around qualified census tracts. And so you can see in the RFP, there's a list of neighborhoods as well as a resource there for you to click on to see that mapped out across Chicago around where those areas are. And then lastly, program expenses. So you can see there, this work can go towards staffing, materials, outreach expenses. Equipment purchase must be less than $5,000. But we know that a lot of organizations will want to expand their own capacity with this money by hiring on either permanent or temporary staff. And so just know that that is fully allowable. And so I'm going to pass it now to Myowa in DPD to talk about the remaining portions.
Hi, everyone. Thanks again for joining us. Once I'm able to sort out my camera, I'll come back on. My camera will come on, turn on. Okay, so to the part where I think most of us are interested in, that's the budget and grant amount. So the total budget for this program is approximately $2 million. And the estimate for funding for each project is between $150,000 to $300,000 for a 2-year contract. So to be clear, a 2-year contract, each amount that you are being granted is for a period of 2 years. So if you apply this year and you're granted, for instance, $200,000, you cannot reapply the next year for another grant and for another amount. So approximately between $150,000 to $300,000, it's for a contract of 2 years with the possibility of extension. Also, applicants are expected to complete a project budget and outline that outlines all your detailed expenses. So these expenses will include salaries, program materials that were used during your program. Grantees will not be provided the money upfront. So instead, you'll be reimbursed monthly with a successful submission of invoices and deliverables in your work plan. So I'll go more into details in one of the slides as to what should be contained in your deliverables in your work plan. Next slide, please.
Yeah, and just to state to add on to what Myowa said around the grant amount. So that is for a 2-year period. And I just want to emphasize that when we say $300,000 is the total amount. So if you get the grant at $300,000, that is for you to decide how you're going to allocate that over the course of 2 years. And so this will be a 2-year contract, like Myowa said, with the opportunity for an extension. And we have some writing in the RFP that says that the city will look at applications that come in, that ask for an amount lower than or above this range, but we are anticipating most, if not all, to be within this range.
Thank you, Nika. Submission requirements. So you're required to complete all application questions in the RFP. You're also required to have a budget outlining all your detailed expenses. So including salaries, if your salaries will be paid hourly, or it's a month, or it's monthly, or it's part-time or full-time. So all those details were required. Also required is a certificate of good standing. This requirement is for profit applicants. For the IRS tax exempt determination letter and recent 9990 and 9990N and 990EZ is from the last 3 years. These two last requirements are for non-profit applicants. Next slide, please. Okay, so the reporting requirement, like I said, in the budgeting requirements. So each applicant is expected to report on both qualitative and quantitative metrics for each of the projects that they will be applying for. So when I say quantitative, that includes the number of hours you've done for one-on-one consulting, how many consultations you've provided in the space of 1 month, how many workshops you've conducted, how many jobs you've created. And for qualitative, we'll be requiring like pictures, stories about projects, about entrepreneurs, community well-being, nonprofit and businesses. And also we'll be requiring demographic information. This would need to be collected by you, especially physical addresses of participating organizations, which is very important to the program. And additional metrics will be determined by grantees in conjunction with the city. So the city and the grantee would determine additional metrics, which might be special to whichever project you might be participating in. So grantees will need to track the above metrics separately. So for example, if an applicant is creating a business development plan for a nonprofit, for a profit, for a startup, you would need to submit, you need to track the above metrics for each of those programs you're handling in your project. And you need to report separately to the city for each of those. So if your project is covering for nonprofits, for profits, for startup, you have 3 separate metrics documents to report to the city. Next slide, please. For the selection criteria will be in 2 phases. Phase 1 will be the technical and eligibility review, and phase 2 will be the proposal evaluation review. For the phase 1, so the requirements that Nick had touched earlier in our slides. So those are the requirements for the phase 1. And if an applicant is not eligible for the phase 1, they're unable to move to the phase 2 of the evaluation of proposal evaluation. So the proposal evaluation in the RFP will have various questions. I think there are 5 categories and over 20 questions. And for each of those questions, they're in 4 categories, like I mentioned. So you answer questions regarding your organizational experiences, values, the program design, implementation strategy, capacity and budget justification, and overall responsiveness. Next slide, please. Okay, so the e-procurement proposals must be submitted online. Proposals submitted by email or fax would not be accepted. So all proposals must be submitted via an online application. We'll go into details on how to apply. Next, to complete an application, the RFP applicants must set up an account in the e-procurement system, iSupplier. All applicants must have a FIN, a Federal Employer Identification Number, and also an IRS W-9 for registration and confirmation of business information. So for new vendors, you should allow for 5 to 7 days for your registration to be processed. And for existing vendors, you would need to send a request by email for an iSupplier invitation. Next slide, please. Okay, So when you go to the website, which is Nika, please can you go to slide next slide? Oh,
Yeah, it'll be this
okay.
e-procurement site right here, but
Okay. So it's going to be www.cityofchicago/e-procurement. So when you go to that slide, when you go to the website, this is what the website looks like. So if you're a new vendor or an existing vendor, you're required to register. This is the icon on the far left is where you would register or log in. And if you're new to using it or you don't know how to use it, there are resources like the third icon, online training materials that will help you navigate the website. Next slide, please. Okay, so when you register and you're in the system, you would see a list of other programs and departments. So the first one, you can see the Department of Planning and Development, the city solicitation title, the DPD, community wealth ecosystem building. And so that's where you click to access the RFP application, and that's where you submit to. Next slide.
and just to note, like these, this is for the entire city, all the RFPs that are going out. So by the day, this will look different. So you'll probably have to scroll in this bottom corner to find where it is as new things have been added. So you just scroll and like Maya said, just look for the title and you'll click there.
Thank you, Nika. So the timeline for the application. So like Nika rightly said, this section will be recorded and posted on our website, and the decks would also be shared by email of everyone who has attended today. So on the 28th of October 2020 will be the last day to ask questions. So because we post questions every week because we'll be posting questions every week on our website. So to allow us to have enough time to post questions and to allow others also get some questions, the last day to ask questions about the RFP would be on the 28th of October 2020. Also, the deadline for submitting this application will be on the 1st of November 2020. Late applications would not be accepted. So the time to submit this is on or before the 1st of November 2020 at 11:59 a.m. That is before noon, not midnight. So just so we're clear, before noon and not midnight. And grantees will be announced early December, and those applicants will have information, and we will send them emails as to acceptance or decline or rejection of the applications. And also grantees will post it on our website. Next slide, please. And so finally got into the part where I'm sure everyone is waiting for. So over to you, Nika.
Okay, so I'm gonna try and tick through some of these questions. Can we add contractors during the 2-year contract to the budget based on needs of clients' communities? That's a good question that I don't know the firm answer to. I want to say that yes, you could add contractors, but I'm gonna follow up on that and come back to you. My guess is that the program will adjust over the course of 2 years, so amendments would happen. But that's my answer today, but I'll get the official answer and then respond back. Yeah, so there's a question around like orgs who are out of state are welcome to bid, but the organizations that we're trying to serve are based in Chicago. Yeah, I think that the big takeaway is that, we are the city of Chicago and we have a vested interest in the city. And, because this is federal funding, we will accept and welcome organizations who do technical assistance. And we know that there's a need for organizations who do technical assistance outside of the city to come in and support us do this work. but the work that you will need to do needs to be within city limits. And so there's an expectation that as you're working with both startup organizations, so whether that's a collective of entrepreneurs and individuals who are trying to get started up, or the organizations themselves, they need to be based in Chicago limits. Those organizations need to be registered within the city. Yeah, so RFP will not be distributed in a lump sum. It will be through a reimbursement process, correct? How does this work if you plan to hire staff? So my understanding of it is that each month you basically submit invoices for services rendered. So you would, for a staff person, you would submit the invoices for the cost of that staff person. No different than if you had incurred expenses for materials or equipment, or you had a contractor for that month. The same is the case for someone that's on staff. You would just submit that and you would be reimbursed for it. So it does require organizations or their fiscal sponsors to have some form of upfront capital, which I know is challenging and frustrating. And we're working to figure out ways to change that process at large within the city. But yes, that's how it would work. Our grants or stipends to program participants' allowable costs? It's a good question that I'm going to have to follow up on. Yeah, I don't know the answer to that, but I will follow up on it. My guess, well, actually, I'm not going to guess. I'm just going to get the answer and then follow up with you on that. Must you have a brick and mortar location? No, you don't need to have a brick and mortar location to be one of our grantees. So there's a question around bond money to support with development related costs. So I want to be clear that so the city has a number of RFPs that are out, and there's a number of programs that could fit your needs, and this might not be the program that will fit your needs. So I want to state that clearly that, for example, we do have the community development grants that are out that are funding a lot of development related projects and costs. And so to be sure that even if you do have a community wealth building model, that you're not just exclusively looking at this fund to support all and every one of your needs, but you are looking broadly across all that the city's doing. And so if you go to our recovery website, which we'll share, chicago.gov/recovery plan, you can see all of the live RFPs. So I'll say that first. I think the second question too is that to kind of go back to the goals of this program and the $15 million broadly, we see it happening in three phases to align with our three goals: strengthen the ecosystem, build the pipeline, invest in pilot projects. And so this is really about organizations that are in the ecosystem. I think this wouldn't really be a good fit for an organization that is trying to start, for example, a worker cooperative with a building and they need money to do the development related costs for that project. This RFP that we're releasing right now will not be a good fit for that program. This is really for those entities in the ecosystem who are providing those services. Down the road, as we get into phase 2 and phase 3, we do intend to release RFPs in early 2023 that would make that would support you in those needs and you would be eligible for. So question about how to plug into the RFP. Maiwa, I don't know if you can drop the website in the chat so folks have it. So everything you can kind of go to chicago.gov/community wealth building. So there you'll see the RFP, you can download it there. It'll link you to the e-procurement site. As we post this recording, post the FAQ, the frequently asked questions, this deck, it will all be on our community wealth building website. So consider that like the when in doubt, go to the website and we'll continue to update it as things go on. Yeah, and to this question, does it make sense for us to partner with local co-op consultant and be part of their RFP. Yeah, I think I would leave that up to you on what makes the most sense. If you want to apply on your own, or if you want to partner with another entity locally or nationally, I think the city is just looking for strong applications that align with our program goals, by people who have the expertise and the relationships to do it, right? And so if you feel like you can do that on your own, feel free. If you feel like it would be stronger and more impactful to do that in collaboration and in partnership with others, you should do that. The city won't be playing a role in matchmaking. We won't be playing a role in encouraging you or advising you to partner with others. I think as far as we'll go is sharing the list of people who registered for this event and email addresses, and we'll leave it up to you to make those connections, to reach out, to dream about the possibilities together. How many grants do you predict awarding for this RFP? We don't know. I think that there is a range. We are budgeting about approximately $2 million, but we are willing to go above that if we feel like there's good proposals that should get funded beyond 2 million. I think we'll just have to see based on how many people submit and what range of dollars they submit for on the lower end or on the higher end. But I think if I were to throw out a number, it could be between 8 and 15 organizations. Totally throwing out a number. This is the first time that we're doing it, so we're learning a lot, but that's a rough estimate. Can an awardee be both a vendor and a beneficiary of another awardee support? For example, an organization can provide legal TA to groups, but has a component of their work that need TA and assets and operations. Yeah, I think that should be fine. You can both be a lead applicant on one and submit and get funding for that. And you could also be listed as a subcontractor on another application. Yes, and I will confirm that that's possible, but in my head, yes, that should be allowable. And I think also encouraged, right? I think we're really trying to build a network of folks who are doing this work in concert with each other and in collaboration. And so that shouldn't, that we won't penalize you for that. So my organization works in disproportionately impacted areas, but has an address outside of those areas. That's fine. So it's not your organization. So you as the grantee can operate and have a headquarters anywhere in the city of Chicago, or I guess technically even nationally, since we're allowing national organizations. It's really less about where your organization is located and more about where the program will take place, if that makes sense. So if you have an organization that's located downtown, but you do a lot of work in North Lawndale, which is one of the disproportionately impacted areas, that's perfectly acceptable. I think you will see in the questions that align to each one of these, there are questions that get at to what extent does your organization's leadership and staff, are they familiar with and accountable to the communities in which it serves? So that will be something that we will be evaluating organizations around, and will prioritize organizations that are familiar with and resemble their communities that they're serving. Is there an organizational minimum budget requirement? Not project, but the whole organization. So like what the budget is for your whole organization, there is no minimum, no.
Yes, but
my organization is currently a grantee with the state program. What assurance is there that the city will, my organization is currently a grantee with the state program that is, and it's a reimbursable grant program. We were awarded in July, but have yet to receive any of the funds. What assurance is there that the city will be on time in paying out reimbursements? Great question. So I think one of the things that we as a city are doing is trying to make sure, I think it's like a both and. How do we on the inside make sure that our processes are in order and we are paying folks in a timely way and expediting those reimbursements when possible. And I think also making sure that we're clear with what we're looking for grantees as they're submitting their invoices or deliverables. So there's trainings on our website that you can use. I think if needed, we'll also work with our grantees. So as a part of this specific cohort, as a part of the community web program, make sure during our monthly meetings that we are on top of any and all concerns around payment and reimbursement. But I think from what I've heard, a lot of times it is, we as a city have templates and folks don't, their invoices are not aligning with those templates. And so there's just a lot of back and forth to get it to the way that we need. And so we'll work together to like iron out those kinks, but appreciate the flag. We are working with a national 501c3 nonprofit organization as our fiscal sponsor. Is it correct that they do not need to submit a certificate of good standing in the state of Illinois? Because as of now, they're not registered with Illinois, correct? Great question. If an organization is a fiscal sponsor of another, does the grant allow for fiscal sponsorship fees, usually 5 to 10%? Yes, is my answer right now. I think someone had also asked a question around if the city had specific requirements or like maximums around that. And so the short answer is yes, that it would allow for you to fund the fiscal sponsorship fees in order for you to conduct the program. I think that would be no different than just like a program fee to conduct the work. And then some of this too, we can iron out during the contracting phase after you've been awarded a grant, just to make sure that we're in alignment around how the budget is organized and how the money is being allocated. Are DCASE grantees already part of the system, or is that different? I'm pretty sure it's different. I think DCASE uses cyber grants as their grant program, and this is our procurement system, which is separate from how DCASE gives out its funding. So if you are an organization that's received funding from DCASE, you probably are not in our iSupplier system, is my guess. But you can go on the iSupplier website and check, or email the support team to confirm.
Yeah, so I have a list here.
After award announcements, will there be a requirement to any in-person budget approval or signing of documents that have to happen before the close of 2022? I'm not sure I quite understand the question, but we'll award in early December. And at the moment of awarding you, if you receive the grant, we will begin the contracting phase, where basically you will review your application, the narrative of what you proposed. You'll walk through the budget with the city and we'll refine that. The city will walk you through all of its other expectations as it gets into this contractual relationship with you. And that can take minimum 30 days probably. So I anticipate most of the signing and official processes will begin in January of 2023. So hopefully that answered your question. If not, feel free to ask again.
Yeah, I put urban.
Already answered the question around estimated number of grantees. I think we'll follow. There's a couple questions around the certificate of good standing. I think that we will need to follow up on that. I think because most of our grants have been for specifically Chicago-based organizations, I think as we're entering into allowing national orgs to apply, I don't quite know off the top of my head, but someone here knows what those requirements are. So we'll follow up and get clarity on that, and then we'll send that. We'll include that in the FAQ as a follow-up from this call.
Okay.
Yes, in theory, do you anticipate that reimbursement payments will be within 30 days after submission?
Yeah.
Agree. It is kind of awkward telling vendors and staff that their check is stuck in the system. Yes, that is what the city anticipates. And I think we'll work with the grantees to make sure that we're doing that. Yes, you can be a recipient of this program and also other Chicago recovery programs. There are some requirements around double dipping for programs. So if you design a program for this community wealth ecosystem building program, and then somehow apply for funding from another organization within the city to basically fund those same exact things that you put in our budget, there are restrictions around that. But you can create a program for us, get funded for it, create a separate program, and get funded by DPD or BACP to get funded by those. So 2 other departments at the city. Okay, I think I know we're at time. Those are the bulk of the questions. I will continue to answer questions. And all of these questions to repeat will be posted. So if you need to hop off, that's fine. We'll document these questions and send out this recording and the slides afterwards. So I will try to get through, I think there's maybe like 10 more. But if you need to hop off, feel free to do that. And thank you for coming. Share the RFP broadly. Yeah, so we're going to follow up. There's some more questions coming in around where you need to be registered. But yes, national organizations who are not registered with the state of Illinois or based here or have never done work here are eligible and able to apply. We'll follow up with information around what that looks like for you in terms of documents to attach. No, you don't need to get certified as a WMWBE. That's not a requirement. Are funds able to be used for subscription to an online tool that would be used for research? Yes, that would just be under general program expenses. I would consider it a separate line item than equipment. So can you share more about your mental model for one-on-one coaching? Is that really for the whole collective, organization to organization, not one person to one person? Yeah, that's actually a good call out. I mean, I think that question is around when you're designing the, when you're designing your program, there's something here listed as one-on-one coaching. I think that's essentially to get at, maybe it's not technically one person talking to one person, but to get at the fact that this is not a group workshop for 10 to 15 different organizations to come in to be a part of this workshop that you've designed around incorporating worker cooperatives. It's really meant to be like, click here and you can sign up for like one-on-one consulting with a specific individual at our organization, and you will have the full dedicated time to work with you as an individual, you all as a cooperative around your specific unique issues, not as a part of a group setting. So that's really what that's meant to indicate, but that's a good call out that, especially with cooperatives, that it would not be just one business owner coming in. Okay, I think that's most of it. I'm gonna maybe just wrap here. Everything else, we're gonna track all these questions and then get back to you, but just wanna say a big thank you. I think we're really excited to see all of you all who've come to this event and all of you who will apply. And we think we're gonna learn a lot through this program and hope to continue to iterate on it and support this work. So I think it's been a long time coming, as many have stated. So we're excited to be doing this with you. So thanks for coming. We will send out materials as soon as possible in the next couple of days and apply before noon on Tuesday, November 1st. Thanks, everyone.